Hello, I'm Ciarán Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. Dr. Frank Campion joins us for this episode of OviCast to give us an update of how performance has stacked up in the lowland better farm flocks this year at weaning. We discuss the lamb performance, its implications for sale, feeding and finishing strategies that will be implemented on the farms in the coming weeks, and the overall importance of assessing weight of lambs on commercial farms at the moment and being realistic about the expected time of finish. We finish up with Frank highlighting the importance of internal parasite control and more importance as the season progresses. We start off, however, with Frank giving us an update on the weaning weights and how they compare to previous years.
What we're seeing in a general trend, and it's probably typical to what we're hearing around the country as well, is that performance is behind where it would have been this time last year, and it seems to have tailored off in that kind of 7 to 14 week period. And I suppose that's, like I said, that's quite typical of what we would have seen. There's potentially different reasons for it on the farms. One of the reasons we're kind of looking at, particularly at the minute, is maybe it was grass supplies and particularly grass quality. End of May, start of June, things might have got a bit ahead of us. And then on some of the farms, dry conditions would have slowed growth a little bit, and we might have been inclined to graze heavier covers that we mightn't have in other years, just to try and make sure we kept enough grass ahead of us. So that's kind of where we're sitting at the minute. So I suppose the thing to do with the weights now is they are what they are, is to make a plan going forward.
I think, Frank, it's fair enough. Like we had you on a couple of weeks ago, more or less up to 7 weeks performance was good. It was on par with last year, some ups, some downs, but on average performance was quite good. Anecdotally, as you indicated, around the country, a lot would suggest the lamb performance did tail off a lot in that May period. Grass quality probably is the biggest reason for parasite challenge, other things kicking in as well.
Yeah, no, exactly. And look, at most of the flocks would have had to go in with an anthelmintic drench sometime between that 7 and 14 weeks. So there would have been an anthelmintic challenge. And that will, if you don't get in on time, it will affect growth. But I don't think that's the overriding problem that we're seeing this year.
No, and certainly look at the weather conditions weren't typical of early summer, so it wasn't either. Grass did get stressed stemmy early, and you indicated in the last time we had on you, there was paddocks that should have been dropped out maybe in the northern half of the country with conditions. They weren't dropped out. Them heavier covers has a knock-on impact.
Exactly. And I think we sometimes we forget that things might go of kilter on the farm for a few days or a week or two, but we have to remember that those impacts, we can see them for weeks to come too, particularly in something as sensitive as lamb growth. So
just maybe, Frank, put a little bit of numbers around this. What are the weaning weights coming in like? Maybe give me an example of some of the farms, like what happened between 7 and 14 weeks. And suppose, look, we have to be conscious, performance always drops off during that period. So how would that compare to previous years?
Yes, look, as you said yourself, performance will always drop off after 7 weeks and up to 14 weeks. But I suppose just looking at 3 of the flocks will be quite similar in terms of their stocking rate, their litter size and their weaning rates and their system. From 7 to 14 weeks, we were seeing growth rates in twin lambs on average about 215 grams per day. And overall, from birth to weaning, those three farms were looking at about 260 grams per day. And lambs are coming in on average, twin lambs again, coming in on average just over 30 kilos. And we'd like to see them closer to the 32 mark really at that stage.
And these same farms, them twin lambs would have been doing somewhere between 280 to 320, 330 grams, I'm assuming, in that first 7 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. All those three farms were looking at from 275 up to 331 for those three farms from birth to 7 weeks.
So that second period, they're back, 20, 30 grams on previous years?
Back about 25 to 30 grams, a little over maybe on previous years, Ciarán. And that's why we're seeing that kind of on average 2 kilo reduction in the weaning weight in the twin lambs.
So look, I suppose that's something we've a lot of interest in, but at a practical level, that average weaning weight is back on the farms by 2, maybe 3 kilos in some cases. That's going to have an impact, Frank, on sales and some of those farms. Obviously, it's not on all of them. But just set the picture for me. How has that had an impact so far at weaning? Is drafting back for some? Is it ahead?
No, so look, you're right, Ciarán. It's not for every farm, and it's important to remember that there's a variation in these flocks, the same as there's a variation in any group of farms that you'd look at. But I suppose drafting is probably slightly back on other years, as you would expect when weights are going to be back. But I suppose the main focus for the lads now is what they're going to do with them for the next few weeks. And to kind of get a handle on what they have and what they don't have. And I think often the temptation when performance is back is we will say, well, look, we need to do something drastic here, and we'll run in and start throwing concentrates at the problem or start doing things radically. It's about making a plan. So if we look at the weaning weights, and we've talked about growth rates and average weights, and they're interesting, but they often hide the story, and it's not the real. They're not the real figure at farm level that we probably need. It's what categories your lambs fit into. So what we've done with the lads is we've looked at the weight categories in terms of, how many lambs are less than 25 kilos, how many are greater than 35 kilos, how many lambs are sitting in between. And the lads will sit down and look at their weaning weights and break it down like that themselves as well. And basically those kind of less than 25 kilo lambs, there's probably about 10% of the lambs in each of those flocks sitting at that. And we're not going to panic about them for the minute. It's the rest of them we're going to see how we can move them along.
So in reality, so Frank, for them really late lambs on those farms, they're long Cape lambs. Those farmers, I'm assuming, have adapted their systems to carry them right the way through.
Exactly, yeah. So for the lads in the program, what their idea with those lambs is exactly, Ciarán, they're long keep. They're going to be left on grass for the summer, good quality grass that is, and managing the main bunch of lambs. They're not going to run in and start feeding those lambs, meal feeding them or anything like that till later on in the year. Some of them lambs won't be gone out of the farm until early next year, and there's no problem with that because we've seen over previous years there'll be a jump in lamb price at that stage, and they have the system adapted that they can hold on to some of those lambs over the winter.
I think, Frank, just in your experience in the store lamb finishing work you've been involved in, like for some of them lambs, grass intake, physical intake is one of the limiting factors. With meal supplementation, you're not going to get that response. You're not necessarily going to get as good a response in those late lambs anywhere if you do put in that level of feed.
No, that's exactly it, Ciarán. You're not going to miraculously make that very light lamb suddenly into a good lamb by feeding it about a meal. In most cases, what you'll end up doing, as you say, intake is limited to a certain amount anyway. You'll get a very modest increase in growth rate, but not enough to make any big difference. And that you're better off to put some cheaper gain on those through grass rather than running in with your meal.
So that's the tail enders. Take me through the rest of the lambs in those farms.
So look at, I suppose what we'd be looking at then is to see where the rest of them are sitting. And, if it's a case that we're worried that there's a lot of light lambs or a lot of behind performance lambs on the farm, and we want to start feeding a bit of concentrates, those lambs that we've pulled out, there's about 25% in each of the flocks of the lambs that are 35 kilos plus. Now some of them will have been drafted a wean, a small percentage of them, and some of them are still sitting there. And if we're going to feed meal to them, we'll concentrate at them. So we'll have what we call a finishing group. And basically from here until throughout the summer, there'll be kind of any lamb that hits within kind of 10 kilos of drafting weight. We'll pull them out into this group. They'll be getting a small amount of concentrate, somewhere between 300 grams and a half a kilo a day, being fed out in trucks. And we'll be finishing out that group the whole summer. And as lambs come up to the weight, as come in within 10 kilos of the drafting weight, they'll start drifting into that group as well and going on a little bit of concentrates. And then everything else will be basically run as one group in as much as possible. They'll be getting the best first access to the best quality grass. Generally, the ewes or some group of dry sheep will be following behind them, cleaning out behind them, so that the lambs are only having to graze out to kind of 5.5, 6 centimeters, and the ewes will come in and clean out behind them.
So we're going to be devil's advocate here for a moment, but you're not blanket feeding everything because obviously them tail enders are going to consume a lot without getting that performance.
Yeah.
And you're not going to wait now until hit mid to late August where grass supplies are getting tight and then realise with a lot of lambs left, we need to move them. So feeding that 25 kilo up group, that finishing group, it's giving you a regular draft and it's dropping the overall numbers on the farm. And it's probably allowing you, Frank, to carry those later lambs for longer.
Well, that's exactly it, Ciarán. You're moving. You're not waiting and seeing and waiting until you get into mid-August and suddenly grass is getting tight and you're in a panic situation. And as you said, because you're moving lambs consistently throughout the summer, you are freeing up that extra bit of grass that you can keep the lighter lambs and the tail enders longer out on grass into the year. So it has a knock-on effect. And I suppose the basic thing, because in our case the lads have all the lambs weighed and we can make that decision, we can see where our weights are sitting. And in other years maybe where performance will be ahead of where we'd want it to be, we might wait a couple of weeks. But if performance is behind and we're worried about getting lambs moving, well then this is a way of going in without having to blanket feed and throw concentrates at lambs that are still going to be looking at us in November and December. We're getting in there, we're targeting the meals feeding at the lambs that are going to give us the best return out of it. And that's something I think most flocks can do. You mightn't have to weigh every lamb in the flock, but go out and weigh a genuine proportion of them, a representative selection, and see where you're sitting, and then make your decisions based off it.
Even to get your rates in, it is a practical thing you can do, just splitting now on the basis of weight, what's nearer finish, what's going to be long keep, and being realistic about that finishing time.
Exactly, yeah. And we have to be very realistic about it. And we get hung up on maybe I want X amount of lambs gone by the end of September, and you have to be realistic about where your lambs are sitting as to what targets you want to or need to hit. And in some of our lower stock farms, we're better off letting the lambs run on grass, put on the bit of cheap gain, and if they're gone those few weeks later in the autumn, what we've seen in previous years is that the price has come up, and those lambs have been better value going later in the year. so there's no need to panic with them.
So just, we talked a little bit of feeding the groups away categories. General lamb management on the farms. I imagine there's a lot of aftergrass in the system. What way they work on the grazing management?
Yeah, so look, at immediately after weaning for most of the lads, their aim was to get the lambs in on the aftergrass. I suppose once the ewes and lambs have been separated for a couple of weeks and the ewes are dried off, the ewes will start following in behind the lambs. So look, the lambs will go in initially to the grass. We're trying to target somewhere between 8 and 10 centimetres of a cover that we're going into. Lambs will graze it out down to kind of 5.5, 6. The ewes will come in then and clean it out to around 4 centimetres. I suppose the big thing with that is residency period. So they're trying to get lambs into a paddock to get 3 to 4 days and they're moving on again, so that they're not spending a week or 2 weeks in the one paddock trying to graze it out to the desired height. They're moving constantly, they're moving quickly, and they're always going into good quality grass. I suppose the second big element then of the lamb management at the minute is the anthelmintics. So all the lads are doing taking dung samples, and we're dosing according to the results of those. And I suppose, like I said, so far nearly everyone has gone in with at least one drench at this stage, and we're starting to see counts starting to come back up again now. And I suppose this summer we're hoping to do a number of reduction tests on some of the farms just to see how well the anthelmintics are working.
And that fecal egg sampling, Frank, that's what kind of frequency, every 2 to 3 weeks?
Yeah, so every 2 to 3 weeks the flocks are doing it, I suppose. Okay. Ideally we'd be going every 2 weeks. It just depends on when the last dose was given. And look, so sometimes that can stretch out to be 3 weeks, but no more than that.
Okay, and look, you touched on something that's very important there. It's one thing you're doing on the farms, is some of you are going to test efficacy. Some of them commonly used products. We know as the year progresses, it becomes more challenging. It is probably one of those things that impinge performance as we head into that August-September period.
Yeah, it can be, and I suppose sometimes we can maybe, what we've seen in previous years is that we do get, we get the initial dose done, things look good, and suddenly we get a big hit for then coming into August, September, and we mightn't be quick enough to react to it. So if we're regularly taking the fecal samples and keeping an eye on it, we'll get in on time and we won't put any check on growth in that August, September period of time.
Frank, look, it was good getting an update, and I think it's resonating with what we're seeing around the country. Probably the key message out of it all is check where you are at the moment, and if you need to supplement, target that supplementation. Yeah,
that's exactly it. If you're not happy with where you are, make a plan. There's no need to panic and throw the creep feeder out in the middle of everything. It's a bit of targeted supplementation at the right type of lambs will help speed up the drafting pattern and allow you maybe to keep some of those tail end lambs longer into the year.
Okay. Frank, good getting an update from you. We'll have you back on again in the autumn, I'm sure. Thanks for that today.
Thanks, Ciarán.
We're going to wrap the episode up at this point. Updates on the Better Farm programme are available on the sheep section of the Teagasc webpage, also in the Teagasc Sheep newsletter, and we'll have Frank on again later in the year on this podcast. That's it for me for this episode. Again, for any updates on the sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Ciarán Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and get notified of any new episodes.